Hi, I'm Jackie from Travelling Thread Co. We're so excited you've chosen our kits. Come on, let's get creative. Hooray, you've got your sewing kit. Let's get sewing our beautiful bow book pockets. They're fully reversible and our kits come with everything you need to get started on your project. So grab your kit, thread your machine, and let's sew. The first step is to mark 8 rows between each The first step is to mark your quilting lines. I've counted 8 rows and marked small marks at the top so I know where to trace my line. I'm then tracing along the existing gingham line on the bias, so at that angle. I'm doing it even where we've got our beautiful little cutout, which is where our gusset is going to be. I've continued all the way along and down the side. I've gone right through even where our gusset is, all the way along the top, and then you want to keep on measuring those 8 all the way down the sides. Then draw your lines and your gingham piece is ready. Also with your kit, you'll have gotten another piece, which could be your lining or your main as they're fully reversible. Because I'm sewing this with my blue gingham, which is already sewn at a beautiful quilted angle, I've decided to go for straight lines on this piece. Then if I reverse it, I've got the best of both worlds. So measuring 1 centimetre from each of the book pocket openings, that's our seam allowance. I've then gone ahead and measured 2.5 centimetres or 1 inch in between, and those are my quilting lines. If you're sewing with our medium, which is slightly smaller in size, you'll do the same marking of 1 centimetre on each of the sides, and you'll be doing a 2 centimetre quilting line gap all the way along. Measure it and your medium or your large will be ready alongside your gingham. When sewing with our velvet, the same will apply for the medium and large with those same 2 sizes. This is the large velvet and I have measured my centimetre from each edge, and then I've done my inch increments and I've traced in chalk. It dusts off really nicely and it doesn't leave any indentation or groove. If you've chosen our corduroy kit, you won't need to do any of the markings with pen or chalk. We recommend, it's a wide wale cord, so we recommend actually stitching in the ditch, we would call it, just in the grooves between each one. So similar to the gingham, you would actually count each row, pin the top of the row you want to stitch, and follow that as your stitch line beautifully down. Once I've done all the measurements, I'm now going to pin. With quilting, pins are your friends. So in your kit, you'll have gotten some beautiful pins. We recommend using those in abundance. I've definitely wanted to put it at the start of where each of my rows are so that I can very much see which one I'm traveling down. And then I've also pinned across the center, still within those rows of stitching as well. And it really helps to hold the batting in place so that it doesn't shift around as you stitch. I've also done the same pinning to my other piece onto the batting. So when you place your piece down, you want to place it facing up. We've done our lines on the right side of the fabric. We want that side facing up with our batting underneath. We want that on both the front and the lining pieces. At your machine, you're going to stitch down with a straight stitch each of the rows that you have beautifully traced on. We've already measured them out, we've already pinned, and we're on a straight stitch setting on our machine. So with quilting, everything's going to be held together with a beautiful seam allowance and enclosed. So the joy of this is we don't need to do our back stitch. So straight down without needing to backstitch at all. Do this along every single row. Think of it as mindfulness. With your gingham piece, we're doing exactly the same thing, except we're obviously putting it through as it's cut on the bias. So I'm going to start with one of my corners and I'm going to work my way along the entirety of the fabric, making sure that I'm stitching my beautiful batting piece to the back. Let's sew. I'm halfway along. Keep going, you can do it. Okay, now we've got all of our quilting lines sewn on and our batting piece nicely attached. What we're going to do is trim down the edges so that it beautifully matches and cut in where our gusset's going to be. I've done that on the gingham. This is what it looks like originally. We're going to cut that small piece out to make it easy to see when we're placing our right sides together. So trim and cut your gusset. I've given these a beautiful press and they've come up so nicely. We're now ready to start piecing our bow book cover together. Sewing our velvet kits is the same as sewing our others. When it comes to our stitching lines, we're not going to reverse at the top and bottom. We're just going to straight stitch down the marked chalk line of each one, removing the pins as we go. You will feel the velvet shift and shuffle as you continue to sew. The best thing to do is just be as gentle guiding it and try not to push and pull, using all those pins at the start down each row so that you don't leave any marks is the best way to sort of move forward with velvet. It is a tricky fabric and it's okay however it works out. We can trim down and our beautiful seam allowances will enclose any of the shifted parts of the batting. With the velvet, the chalk will just dust off, so it's good to just give it a nice smooth down or a nice flick, and same as the other ones, trim down any of your loose threads and your sides so that you can easily see putting your right sides together. You'll also need, with your velvet, to cut in where our gusset is going to go. No matter which project you've chosen, whether it's our luxe velvet covers or our gingham covers, decide which is your outer piece. So for me, I'm choosing the gingham as my outer piece and I'm choosing the floral as my lining. We're going to get whichever we're using as our main. We want to clip our sides together, making sure that our fabric is matching really nicely. We're going to do that for both sides and we are going to stitch from top all the way down using a 1 centimeter seam allowance on both sides. Okay, so I have stitched my seams on both sides of my gingham piece. My lining piece, I am going to make sure that on one side I leave a really nice gap of about 7 to 8 centimeters. This allows me to pull the main through and it will beautifully self-line later. So making sure we're going to reverse, we're going to stitch down to our first pin of the gap, reverse, we're going to leave that gap, once again, reverse to start and reverse at the end. So you will have a really nice gap and your stitching will be held into place either side. So now on one side of my lining piece with the right sides together, I have a beautiful gap here and that's going to help me turn through my fabric later. The other side of my lining is completely stitched top to bottom. The velvet is definitely more tough and thick to get through, so you will need to guide really sturdily. Just don't pull or push, just guiding, but you will need to sort of hold it and really like guide your fabric through. So now I have 4 gussets, 2 on the main and 2 on the lining. I'm going to reach my hand into the pocket and just maneuver the fabric, making sure that my outer seam is nicely pressed open. I'm going to then really nicely press that down, and at my machine I will run a 1 centimeter allowance from the top reversing and then down to the bottom reversing. I'll do that on all 4 of my gusset pieces and then I'll trim them down. This is what it should look like. We will get our scissors, trim it down, and when we turn them in, if we've done it on all 4, they will be a beautiful gusset for our book. Okay, we now have both pieces with our gussets sewn, and we have a nice little gap in one side of just our lining. We're actually wanting to mark on both the main and our lining piece the center points. So I'm going to match up my seams and I'm going to mark the center point. I'm going to make sure that I do that on both sides. With my pin so that I know where the center is to place my bow later. Once I've done that to both pieces, we are going to set them aside and sew our bows. Taking your 2 bow pieces, what you'll be doing is folding those in half lengthways, and what we're going to do is then pin the length, and starting from the very top we're going to go down to our corner, pivot our needle and stitch all the way down to the bottom, reversing at both ends. To start, I've lowered my presser foot, I've done a little bit of a reverse stitch. I'll be sewing directly then to this corner, and leaving my needle in, I'll be pivoting to continue sewing the length. Let me show you. As I get closer to the corner, I'll leave my needle down into the fabric, remove my next clip, lift my presser foot, pivot my fabric, see how it's not moving away from it because the needle's holding it down. Then I need to make sure I lower my presser foot back down. I've successfully pivoted, I'm still a nice centimeter in from the edge, and I'll continue to sew. Once you've finished that, you're going to trim any loose ends using the beautiful snips in your kit. And we're also going to trim across each of our corners. That way when we turn it in, it will remove that bulk from those 2 corners. To turn through, I've got just a nice blunt knitting needle and gone down my pointed end where I've trimmed off the points, and I'm literally just going to push that through. And then I'm going to use the blunt end of my knitting needle. You could do this with a blunt pencil or just anything you have to hand to push out that beautiful point at the end. And to do that to both of your bow straps. To insert our bows into our book pocket, we'll need to turn the part that we're using as the main piece, which is also where we've sewn both the side seams completely closed. We want to turn that in the right way. And I've still got my center pieces marked. We're going to put that piece inside the lining piece. We've left the lining in the wrong way, so right sides together, and we've turned our main piece so that we can see the right sides. Place that one inside the other so that your piece with the gap is on the outside. We're going to ensure that we then have both of the right sides facing each other, and when we've stitched around the top and stitched our bows in, we'll be able to pull it through. So now you're going to take time to match both of your side seams. I've finger pressed that open. I'll do the same with my inside seam. And I want to run it up that seam line so you can see that they're both matched beautifully there, and clip into place. Do this on your other side seam, so I have both of my side seams nicely matched up and finger pressed open so we don't get lots of bulk if they're closed. I've got my center marked on both sides. I'm now going to get my bow pieces, and starting with one piece, if you have fabric that you're using of ours, if you've chosen a design where it has a one-way print, then you'll need to put your book cover so that that one-way print is right side up like you're reading a book. So that might mean you'll need to flip it over if that's the direction of the print. So as soon as you've got it so that the right side of that beautiful print is up, with my gingham and floral, it's not a concern. It depends on if it's sort of like a one way or if I feel fussy about it. The reason that that's important is when we place our bows inside, we actually want to place it so this point is actually facing down. So if you've got a print where this is the right way, we want the point then facing down to the bottom of the book cover. Once I've got that there, the easiest way is to gather it on itself, and then in between the lining and main on one side, I'll match it to my center. I'll bring the main up to meet it so that it's sandwiched between both, and I've got that center point there as well. At this point, I can pull my pins out and I can make sure, because when we sew, we don't want this to shuffle or catch. So we want to make sure we pin at the top part and again down at the bottom part. It's easier then too to make sure that we do our pins side on like that, so that when we come to it, we can sew right up to it, then pull the pin out, knowing that we've secured it without it folding or catching on itself. I'll do another pin down the bottom part of the bow. And it's nicely sandwiched and secured in there. Repeat that for the other side with the other bow piece, and you're ready to stitch around the opening. At my machine, I'm going to use a 1 centimeter seam allowance to sew around the entire opening of my book pocket, reversing at the start and finish, and making sure I capture these beautiful bows in really neatly. As you get to your side seams when you're sewing, just ensure that they are still nicely opened. Get nice and close, remove the pin, and I tend to hold it down. You may even need to put your needle in and just make sure it's held down really nicely. I've stitched around the entire opening, and I've made sure that as I stitched across my side seams they both stayed beautifully open and didn't get all caught up. We're now going to pull gently through that gap that we had left our beautiful main book pocket piece. That's why we also did the reverse stitch, so that when you're pulling you're not seeing threads unravel. See how now I'm starting to see the lining piece as well. Just maneuver it, and this is where the magic happens. I'm getting just my fingers in to push the gussets out neatly. That's my lining piece, and this is my beautiful outer piece. Okay, so we're now going to stitch this closed, but to keep it beautifully reversible, I'm not going to stitch it on my machine, though that is an option if you don't mind whether or not it's reversible. You'll just see like a small stitch mark there, but if you are planning on having this on the outside and you want to keep it nice and invisible, we are going to use a ladder stitch or an invisible stitch. It's the exact same one to close this up. So you'll take the lovely hand sewing needle that you have in your kit, you'll thread it, not one end, and I'll show you how to close that gap. So to do a ladder stitch or an invisible stitch to close this gap, we're going to make sure that we actually have the fabric at the gap turned down to the same as the seam allowance, as though you would have sewn it down. So I'm just sort of pressing that one side, making sure this other side is also at the same allowance, and then I'm going to just put them together like that. So I have my needle and I have knotted it down one end so that it doesn't slip through my fabric. You can see my knot there. I'm going to make sure that I hide that knot. So down one of the sides here, I'm actually, where that opening is, I know I've pinned it shut, I'm basically going to secure just on the inside so that you don't see the knot. So then my knot's in there. I'm actually just going to go one more time, and as I come up this time, I will put it through that loop that it's making so that it holds it really nicely in place there. It's all nice and secure down the end where that opening begins. I will be putting just through that one piece of fabric there, about not quite a centimetre, however much you would like to do. The idea is that we don't see this stitch anyway. So I've put it through there, and then directly across from where I've come up, I'm going to do the same on the other side and keep it a similar distance. Pull through. Once again, directly across, opposite side, about the same distance. Directly across, same distance. Directly across from where you come up, and just keep that same distance going. You'll see how I've come right out at where the top of the gap is. Then I'm going to finish it off by literally just catching this small amount of fabric and then putting my needle back up through the loop and pulling it tight. You can do that one more time just around that exact same little piece, and then snip it off, and you've got this beautiful closed gap. If you're using our velvet, we choose not to top stitch. It keeps it really nice and clean, gives it that luxe view on the outside, And we find that the inside stays just beautifully put because of the kind of bulk and way that this velvet sits once you've sewn it up. Only needing to top stitch, we recommend on your wovens or your ginghams or your prints. It is optional. You might just find that if you don't, it might sort of creep out. That sort of lining might creep out, but top stitching in place will hold it really nicely. I've given it a press at the iron, so I've pressed around the inside, not trying to sort of press it down or anything, just opened it out and pressed around with my iron with my points down for when I tie my bow. That's going to be the top. I'm actually going to start stitching at the bottom on the back piece. Of course, you can start wherever you like. I just know that this will be the tiny bit that you'll see the back stitch, so that's just a recommendation. Start just past that bulk of that seam there, and I'm honestly just going to follow the line that's on my presser foot, or you could follow just the very edge of your presser foot, which would take it to just almost a centimetre. I just like it a little narrower. It's personal choice and also just skill where you're at and what you feel comfortable doing. We'll do hand wheel, reverse stitch to hold it into place, and stitch around the entire opening. Make sure we don't catch our bows. So when we sew along this part, just make sure as you go, you're just maneuvering. So for me, I'm just going to keep it sturdy with my fingers as I go through and follow that beautiful line on my presser foot. Remember when you're at the bows to keep them nicely out of the way and maneuver your fabric. And continue sewing. As you get to a bulkier part, we have pressed open those seams on the inside, and that's why that is important at the stage where you have the ability to sort of maneuver what's inside your book pocket. I still find I'm on a heavy duty machine, but I've sewn these up on just the Singer Start as well. So you might just need to kind of put some pressure on. That doesn't mean to pull or push, but you really can just maneuver it over the bulkier seam. So I'll actually be gently pulling out the back as it's moving through the seam. I'll show you. Just to get it through that bulk, and then make sure we've got it all tucked nicely and continue to sew. Well done, you now have a gorgeous, fully reversible book pocket, and we hope that you absolutely love this for gifting. We hope that this is a project that has unblocked you, helped boost your creativity, and just really enjoy it. I know that once I'd made one, I just was addicted and kept making more and more, and we really hope the same for you. We hope you've loved sewing with our kits. Well done.